Good morning, everyone. How are you? You good? There's no such thing as a free breakfast, right? So we're going to need some energy and some participation because we're going to talk about everybody's favourite topic, difficult conversations, right? So now, if 0 is I hate having difficult conversations and 10 is I flippin' love having difficult conversations, who would be here close to a 2? Put your hands up. A 2? Yep, that's good. A 4? All right. Yep, still good numbers. 6? All right, now we're starting to get into the weirdo territory. And who's it about? Anywhere between 8 and 10. All right. Well, maybe you should give this talk. Fantastic. Good on you. It's important to lean into difficult conversations, but as you heard, Healthy Harold started out at Wayside. Who's heard of Wayside Chapel? Right. Oh, you good people. You know, I always say when it comes to Healthy Harold, is there anything better or more Aussie than learning about drugs in the back of a caravan from a giraffe? Right? That's... I get to spend every day with people a little bit drug affected. So normally when I'm talking to someone, there's someone stoned or falling asleep. So I see 2 of you at the back there. But other than that, it's all fine. It makes me feel comfortable. And I don't mind heckling or interjections as well. If any talk goes for too long at the Wayside, people just get up. One lady during one of my talks said, I just need to go have one of my supplement breaks. And I think we all know what that meant. She didn't sleep for the next 4 days. So that's the kind of space that I work and operate in. Wayside Chapel's in King's Cross, but also in Bondi Beach, and we live at the intersection between life and death. Our vision is about love over hate. And I'll get into that a little bit, but let's go to the next slide. If it's right, I didn't get the clicker. I only just arrived because, you know, I was 2 hours early when I spoke in Melbourne, and because I just lived down the road, I was 10 minutes late. So thank you, Linda. Appreciate that. All right. When I initially was invited to give this talk, oh, hang on. How do we go back? Back. All right. Yeah, I'll talk a bit about Wayside here. Well, first of all, I edited the slide pack this morning. No matter. All right. There we go. Yeah. So our vision is love over hate. How do we live in a world where love wins over hate? How do we stand between rich and poor, housed and homeless, black and white, gendered and non-binary, and live in such a way that love prevails? And that puts you on a very narrow ledge, because on one side of that ledge is over-indexed individualism that leads to a lot of the cancer of our society around loneliness and disconnection. And the other side of that ledge is this rancid collectivism that, you know, all of our media comes to us in our phones being narrowcast. We don't get exposure to different views, and we end up being weaponised against the other side. It says choose a side. Pick up a weapon, which is usually a keyboard. You know, we no longer have broadcasts of our news, we only have narrowcasts, which kind of locks us away from being able to learn and grow in a healthy environment. If you look at my phone, all you'll find is centre-left politics and another category of news called "You'll never believe what these child stars look like 30 years on." I just cannot stop clicking on that stuff, right? It is just my absolute jam. You know, when I was invited to give this talk, the immediate impression I got was, I thought I misread because I'm not good on details, was how to avoid difficult conversations. Look, I'm an Asian immigrant. I was born in Malaysia, came with my mother and father, and I have 3 sisters. And, you know, I always felt kind of a little bit on the outer, but I was the only boy. And I don't know what my parents were thinking when they named me. I have 3 beautiful sisters, Shimona, Shobana and Shamala. And then I came along and they're like, John, that'll do. Right? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And so I always felt kind of on the outer, but I always tell people the greatest day of my life was my first day of university, because it was the day I found out what course my mum had enrolled me in, right? Now, you're laughing because you think I'm joking, but I see some Asian faces that know exactly what I'm talking about, right? We do not have difficult conversations. We just fall in line. In fact, most of my life had been dedicated to having the avoidance of difficult conversations, which is quite ironic in the place that I've ended up now. Wayside was started by a guy called Ted Noffs, an amazing man who saw that there was something wrong in the world and he wanted to do something about it. And through his initiatives, Wayside is still continuing on 61 years later, right? Healthy Harold started from there. The first medically supervised injecting centre started out as an act of civil disobedience because we were sick of picking up dead bodies on the side of the road. Right? The Freedom Rides left from the doorstep. If you know anything about that, it's the 50-year anniversary of the Freedom Rides when a bunch of Aboriginal students got in a bus with some media cameras along, led by Charles Tex Perkins, and went to some of our outback towns. You may not know that apartheid was based upon some of the policies that Australia had that would separate races. They still had whites-only swimming pools in towns like Mudgee and Moree. You know, these were radical things that upset the apple cart, upset the status quo. Our life education, of course, and Lifeline also began out of Wayside and Wesley Mission as well, you know, partnership between the two of us. Ted launched Life Education. It's now international. It's amazing. Healthy Harold is everywhere. And he was under a lot of pressure and a lot of attack, and he ended up suffering a massive stroke. In fact, the last 8 years of his life, he was completely incapacitated, and save for two things. He could move one hand and he could say two words. And anyone who would come to visit him at his home, as his wife took care of him in his final years, he would get them, he would beckon them over with the little strength he had in one hand. And he would grab them by the collar. And he would whisper the two words to them. And those words were, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I don't take that to mean I'm sorry for the state I'm in. I spoke to his grandson recently to confirm if it was just a myth or if it was a true story. He said, absolutely true. And we both agreed that what he was apologising for was that you cannot create change in this world without making a few mistakes, hurting people, and upsetting how things are in order that you can create how things should be. There is no such thing as important social and lasting change that happens just because it was meant to happen. It takes what Margaret Mead said, never doubt what a small and thoughtful, committed group of people can do. Indeed, they have the power to change the world because they're the iconoclasts. You know, you've all seen that YouTube video, you know, you only create a movement with the first follower, right? But the first guy, everyone just says, you're an idiot, you're a nut job, until everyone else joins in. There's a cost. I want to acknowledge that for you as you engage in your leadership. I'll give you a few hints on really helpful ways in which you can think about difficult conversations. All right? It's important to reframe them in your minds from difficult conversations to important conversations. Because we are trying, you know, our vision at Wayside is love over hate, and I've spoken about that, and our mission is creating community with no us and them. And that means at all stages, at all times, we are confronted with our own biases. You know, one of our big values is around no judgment. But we are always constantly judging. We live in a self-conscious world. We mostly judge ourselves, don't we? But, you know, we're always got that thing going on in our mind where we're always thinking about how I'm coming off, but we're always making impressions of people. And I say, let your mind run free. It's just control your mouth, right? That's one of the hottest tips there. And sit and listen. You know, when volunteers come to Wayside for the first time, because we don't try and fix anyone, we say, no one's a problem to be solved, they're a person to be met. And if someone walks away from us met rather than worked on, it's been a good day. because that's what everyone gets everywhere. You go anywhere for help now and they take a clipboard and they tick off a few boxes and give you a pill or a program or a pamphlet, and you think, what was the point of that? I tell my volunteers on their first shift, bring a pack of fresh undies, and nothing says I love you like a clean pair of undies when you've been homeless, let me tell you. And a pair of socks. And I say, give the undies at the front desk, keep the socks in your back pocket. And the first conversation you have when you're tempted to download all your wisdom, you know, someone's homeless because of adolescent and childhood trauma, and you say, have you tried adding quinoa to your diet? You know, instead of saying that, take your socks out and shove them in your mouth, right? And just continue to listen. Because there will come an opportunity where you can reframe. And don't think about this as someone so different from me, or particularly as you think with your direct reports, is how do I help focus them on the important conversations? So let's reframe them from difficult to important, and Annalee is going to go much more in depth than I do ever. And develop a shared language. We have our senior leadership team, so I lead a team of, we're about 150 staff, 600 volunteers, about $14 to $15 million turnover a year. So big operations, big interdependencies. They're similar to the ways you have projects and Gantt charts. I didn't even know what a Gantt chart was 7 years ago, and now I live and die by them. And there are ways of developing short and sharp interactions by using shared phrases. So whenever something isn't meeting a standard, we call that an assessment. Right? And so I will have a one-on-one. So yesterday, there was a bit of a blow-up on a project and I hadn't handed it over properly, so one of the execs was digging their heels in and the other exec felt blindsided by it. And I had to sit them down and say, look, I've got an assessment that you feel like that you haven't finished on this project. But just by using that, and we've had a breakdown, assessments and breakdowns. You know, instead of, it depersonalises it. It helps you be a leader who leads with curiosity. Because you're saying, this is my assessment, please push back on me if I'm wrong, tell me what is the nature of the problem. Instead of how I would have framed it and that was an important conversation. Beforehand I would have said, it was a difficult conversation because I said, I would have normally thought and framed it something like this. Mate, pull your head in, right? Stop wide-anting your colleague as they try and launch the project and you keep saying, no, it's not complete yet, it's not complete yet. And it was the most beautiful conversation we had. We ended up talking about the football at the end of it, whereas normally, you know, when you have a difficult conversation and it goes really poorly, you both want to run out the door at the first possible opportunity. And so we were able to address it through having a shared language, which leads me into the next slide, right? This is from Kim Scott. She's got a great book called, I can't remember the name of the book, it's at the end, but Difficult Conversations or something. Look, I pretend to read a lot of books, but I just read the first chapter and the last chapter. The butler usually always does it. And think about our languages. You see the vertical axis is when we care personally for someone. And it's okay to care personally for your direct reports. In fact, you should. And then there's the horizontal is challenge directly, right? And I'm going to get us to think through these in a little bit. And I'll put this slide back up. You don't need to write it down unless you want to. There is a way of talking to someone that they call ruinous empathy. You care for them, but you're too afraid to challenge them, right? Oh, by the way, when you're starting a difficult conversation, never start it by asking, how are you? You know, you've got to address someone's performance and you say, how are you, mate? And they're like, oh, my dog's sick and the kids have got the flu and, you know, my ageing parents won't move out of the family home. And but you know what? If there's anything I can look forward to, it's coming to work. Now, what did you want to talk about? All right? Just say, thanks for your time. We've got to have a really important conversation. You know, I've got, you know, you can use whatever language you want. Well, this is my assessment. There's been a breakdown. You know, and then there's obnoxious aggression. You know, we've all had managers, I'm sure, and bosses like that. Just get it done. I don't care, right? And the one I stick to is that manipulative insincerity. And I'll go deeper into that in a moment. But words create our world. So I mentioned earlier that I'm a child of an Indian immigrant. So my grandpa, my mum loved English and English literature, and she got a scholarship to study in England, which is no small feat for an Indian girl in Malaysia. And what happened was my granddad looked at the letter and burst out laughing and said, "Women don't study." Right? And that was the end of her aspirations from that moment. Words create our worlds. You know, they either create horizons of possibilities for others, or we can use them to condemn. I'm sure, you know, that's why most of us, when you talk about our schooling, we can remember the three things the three teachers said to us, like, "You'll never succeed, you're not good enough." We probably forget the 5,000 good things they say, because negative words, you can destroy something really quickly. It takes a long time to build something up. So Mum lived her life vicariously through us, and she was very pleased with her daughters, not so pleased with her son. Was failing English, was terrible at it, to the point where she wrote one of my essays in Year 9. And I handed it in, and then the teacher saw me in the hallway in a room like this, and she said, "John, get here now." I thought, oh crap, busted. She walked up, she put her hand on my shoulder. This is the 80s and 90s, you could still manhandle kids. And she said, "My God, I've just read your essay. I've never read an essay better than it, ever. And I'd like your permission to enter it into a national award." And it won. And she said, "Now, as you accept the prize, you have to read the essay out." And I'm a minister, right? I'm supposed to be a good boy. Not so back then. I just doubled down on the lie, right? and just read it. Read it out, won this national prize. It was an essay about multiculturalism, which was quite radical back in the 80s. And, you know, I sat down and I thought, thank God, that's over. And then she looked at me and she said, "You know what? I cannot wait for your next essay." Panic set in. But her high expectations, combined with her faith in me that was unfounded, was based on a lie, unlocked something in me, which was a desire to work and to work hard, to the point where I think I got a 99 for Year 12 English. And now, as part of the work at Wayside, does anyone here get the Inner Circle? It's an email, there you go. It's an email I write weekly that now goes out to about 60,000 people. Right? I write a weekly blog to 60,000 people from a kid who couldn't even spell. Right? Her faith and her belief and her high expectations, along with her uncompromising expectations of me, unlocked something that was powerful. So there are three ways we can be a leader, and that's where I want to go quickly into our discussion. There's the critic. The critic as a leader always, and I'm sure we've had experiences with them, always look for your weaknesses and wait and point them out. Right? There's me, the cheerleader. Never look at the weaknesses and just say, "Yay, yay, yay, you did so well." And then 6 months later I say, "You didn't pass your probation, mate." You know? And they're like, "What? I thought I was doing a great job." Right? And I'll get into the second session about why it is. And then there's a coach. What does a coach do? And I know it's a very American word, but I wanted 3 C's. You know, I do have to preach in churches sometimes, so, you know, the more you can keep it the same letter, the easier it is to remember, right? The critic, the cheerleader, or the coach. The coach is the one who is able to affirm what you do well, but also is able to point out that which is within you to point out those areas of improvement and help you and encourage you and inspire you, but still expect you to do the work. You know, we don't leave jobs, we leave bad managers, right? And I don't want you to be afraid of that, but use that as an opportunity and as a bit of energy in which you can launch yourself into your career. So now you're going to move into your table discussions. You have 10 minutes. There are 28 tables in here. I have a random number generator, so you're all on notice because you're going to have to share. Okay. Quickly, I want you to look at... Oh, wrong button. There's a laser pointer. What is your natural style when it comes to the critic, the cheerleader, of the coach? But most importantly, I want you to dive in. What actions and language and phrases can you adopt to start using in order to move to a coaching mindset? And that also feel free to incorporate what's some shared language maybe you could build with your team. But go for it now. You've got 10 minutes, and Annalee's going to provide me with a beautiful bell at the end of our time. All right, go for it. Is that working? Yes, there we go. I feel like a yoga instructor, you know. Nothing better when a 21-year-old girl named Brittany from the Gold Coast speaks Hindu to me. Anyway, that's one of my personal things. Welcome back. You know, I got a random number generator, so I'm going to ask 2 tables to share now, and so we're going to elicit the conversation. Part of why I asked you about what your natural style is any leader can learn from someone else's mistakes, but great leaders learn from their own. All right? So, table 12. All right. Do we have a roving mic, perhaps? Or get up and yell? All right, table 12. Share. Where did your conversations lead you? Were they difficult?
Sorry, the mic's not working. No, this one's working.
That's very profound. Just really.
How's that? Oh, there you go.
Beautiful.
We touched on a couple of things, just saying you really need to make sure you adapt to the person you're speaking to. So whether there's someone that likes to be have like a positive conversation, or they're quite direct and they want to just go straight into it, but really framing that conversation around what the person you're speaking to. Making sure that you're leading with certain questions. So as you touched upon, don't say, hey, how you doing? But just maybe if you're speaking about work, just say, what did you think of it? And let them speak and get everything that they feel. And then you could be like, that's great, I thought this, and maybe we could do this. And just like being very open with conversations there. We said when it comes to being a critic, someone mentioned that you'd rather a harsh critic than a leader that's not genuine, because I feel like you could have that conversation, like you said, about being really positive and that cheerleader and like thinking everything is going really well, but then find out actually everything is terrible, and then they're doing a horrible job, and then they'll feel really like crap about themselves. And and then really making sure you're utilising the right words, and making sure when you're speaking to that person, you're learning from themselves. So almost like a reverse mentoring type of situation.
It's wonderful. Thank you, table 12. I have a series of agreements with my executive team, and 2 of them are, I will always assume positive intent, right? And therefore, I give you, the second agreement is I give you full permission. Do not wordsmith what you're going to say. I would rather, with the assumption of positive intent, you get the words wrong, but you give it to me straight. And that kind of takes all the pressure out of, you know, going it through AI 16 times with the how do you be nice but firm to your boss filter. That's great. The next table was 22. Where's 22? Come on down. You are the next contestant. I'm probably showing my age by saying that. Where's table 22?
I was so... we were really, we thought when 12 was there, we were never going to get picked up at 22. So, brilliant. Anyway, Chris at Essence Mediacom. We had a really good discussion, actually, and it turns out there are a real range of different types of coaches and leaders here at the table. We spoke a lot about ensuring that any conversation is not a shock to the person that you're delivering that to. But also that not dealing with difficult conversations creates anxiety. And quite often we, you know, when we have anxiety about, you know, in our lives and in work, it's often because we haven't dealt with a problem that we know is a problem. And quite often that comes from us not having the conversations that we know we should. So we spoke a lot about that. We spoke about some of the ways in which we coach those around us, our teams, really fruitful conversation. A couple of us are more kind of risk avoidance and more of the kind of cheerleaders, and a couple of us are more kind of in the critical side. So we just talked about getting that balance right, of being a positive mentor to those around you, but also having a really straight and honest conversation.
Fantastic,
Cool.
thank you. You raised a very interesting point, and I will touch on it in the second half. But I don't use the word self-care anymore. It's not my bag. It is because I've just watched White Lotus, and it's kind of really doing my head in right there. And then I was walking on the beach yesterday morning, and I saw the older brother from the boat. Whoa, freaked me out. I think they're in town. But I use the phrase self-kindness. Self-kindness. Why do we tell ourselves, I will prioritise those who I lead's mental health over my own? Why is that okay? It shouldn't be okay. Why do we say, okay, to avoid this person going through some sort of stress, I will take all the stress and anxiety on myself? That's... and when we go into difficult conversations, I know we have a head full and a heart full of the script from HR, right? And don't say this and do say this and turn left here and then scratch here and then sniff there. And then you go, I'm trying to be human here, so let's push into a bit of that. There are plenty of opportunities to increase your micro skills, like don't ask how are you when you're about to launch into something, develop some shared language. There's 1,000 tips, and I'll show you 2 great books, Kim Scott, Radical Candor, as well as there's a guy called Jefferson Fisher, and he started during lockdown just recording videos in his car, and now he's got a podcast and a book, and the book was just released called The Next Conversation. He, like me, he believes that, good conversations can change the world. Right? Keep that in your frame. Now, it's important to learn the micro skills, but it's not enough. Another thing that was raised is the quality of your connection with your people matters. In social work and community work, 70% of the result of a healthy therapeutic intervention is based upon the strength of the relationship between the two people. I haven't seen any research, but I'm sure it's the same across all industries, for-profit or not-for-profit. So that means, as a leader, we never knew we needed to sign up to doing some self-work. The Buddhists tell a great story of, they gave man divinity and man abused it. Of course it was man, not women, but it was man. And so the angels got together and said, what can we do? And they said, great, I've got a great idea. We'll go to the deepest depths of the ocean and bury it there. They'll never find it. And they said, nah, they'll find it. Okay, let's put it on the top of the highest mountain in the clouds, and they'll find it. And then the person who was kept on objecting, whatever deity it was, they said, okay, what's your big answer then? And he said, he or she, probably she said, let's do this. Let's hide it within him. He'll never think to look for it there. All right? How do you tend and know yourself? Know the contours of your own life. Know the contours of your own shape. That is now non-negotiable work for a leader. And I'll tell you why. Right now, the number one workplace injury in New South Wales is what? Can someone yell it out? Psychological injury. Right? We need to be caring for others, but we cannot pour water out of an empty well. Go and learn about yourself. So my journey was, at about 45, I was like, I don't take any medication, I'm fine. Right? And then, believe it or not, in a radical twist of fate like no one else has ever experienced, I got diagnosed with ADHD. No one's been diagnosed with that recently, have they? Right? I tell you what, the Ritalin, great for weight loss. Right? Fantastic. I've heard you can snort it too, but that's, I don't know. It's fine. Gets you going at 8 a.m. for a talk, let me tell you. And by the way, thank you, Sydney, you are great. Like, Melbourne suck, right? You interact. Look, I grew up in Melbourne, and now I live here, but, just the engagement is so good. And I think we're the best version of Aussies. Don't tell anyone else I said that, right? So I got that diagnosis with ADHD. And then after I started taking it, two things happened. One, I stopped biting my nails, which was great, but then they grow so quick, right? It's disgusting. The second thing is I realised I was going into interactions differently. And I asked my psychiatrist about this, and he was saying, yeah, one of the most common by the way, a lot of leaders have ADHD, right? There's a good chance you do. And he said, you've also got this thing, because everything's got a name, it's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is a fancy way of saying you will bend yourself over backwards to not upset people. You do not want to be rejected. And all of a sudden that was disappearing from my life. And I looked back in horror at how much of my behaviour had been around not upsetting people. My mum picked my wife's wedding sari. I married an Aussie, a thoroughbred skip, as she calls herself. She's from Adelaide. No convicts here, mate. And but Mum didn't get it delivered because it was the Indian version of Amazon. I don't know what that is, but it was terrible back in those days. And it arrived the day before, and my wife was like in between me and my mum, and I'm like, I give up. That's what every good man does. But, I will go out of my way to avoid difficult conversations, which is why I'm a cheerleader. I often do cheerleading in the hope that the 5% they're getting wrong, they'll work out themselves and improve, right? As opposed to now the new language we have is to say, that was over the line, or that wasn't good enough, that wasn't up to standard. And it's not a big thing, doesn't create a big meeting, just a little thing in the midst of the flow of our meeting. That was below the line. That interaction there, that was below the line. Because it's often behaviour. Rarely is it, it's not commonly work performance, right? I mean, you can deal with that in the first 3 to 6 months of performance management. It's often interactions with colleagues and that kind of wide anting. And if you're a man in leadership, you've got to be very aware of doing the work, doing your inner work. And so I had this rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And then my mum and dad, Dad is 10 years older than Mum, which was great for Mum. He had cash and stability when they were young. But now at 86 and 76, Mum's not enjoying it anymore, right? She's like, he's old. I'm like, it was always part of the deal, right? What were you expecting? He'd get younger, right? So whenever he gets unwell, she starts yelling at him. And it's just like, yeah, very kind and caring. You can see the nurturing environment. You can see why I became what I did. Then I was doing my head in over it, and then I realised that's her anxiety. And I realised, whilst I don't yell, I cannot cope when my wife is sick. So what do is I leave her in the room and disappear. All right? Oh, great husband I am. All right? And so I realised that's my symptom of anxiety. So I've gone and started a course of antidepressants, and thankfully the first one I started works. So now I've gone from 45 years old on nothing to 3 medications because I've had to add in a heart tablet as well. So welcome to the world of ageing. Growing old ain't for the faint-hearted. So think about that. Think about all the situations and the scenarios in which create me anxiety, which is most. Right? Having difficult conversations. In fact, I'll confess something to you. I don't have a problem having difficult conversations with prisoners and guys who are on the streets. It's my executive team, because I know how long it takes to recruit them, right? I know the cost when you have one person down on that team, on the stress and the load and how you have to manage that. So I'm often just on tenterhooks and I'm walking on eggshells when I'm trying to address their performance. So to be forewarned is to be forearmed. I know I take that in. And sometimes we've got to have really difficult conversations with people. There was a young boy who was on the streets in the late 60s, early 70s, and Ted and Margaret Knopfs cared for him, and he went into jail for a little while after that, and so the next person who ran Wayside cared for him, and then the next person that ran Wayside gave him a job, and he's been working there his whole life, and his whole story of moving towards health and wellness it was attributed to the Wayside. I had to sack him 2 weeks ago. Right? You don't think I stayed up at night. It ruined the quality of my relationships at home with family and kids, around work, everyone could say, John, where are you? You're not here, you're not present, because it was consuming me. And then I had a chat with my coach, and he gave me the following tips. Because I forgot to change slides. I'm terrible with slides. Just keeping on the theme, leadership is costly. All right. He said, map the territory of this meeting. Right? Map the territory. So he said, think about everything that is going to happen before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting, and write it out in advance. Because a difficult conversation of that nature, just like performance management, you know the first instinct is for everyone to run and leave the room. All right? Is that all you wanted to tell me? All right, I'm done. Goodbye, I'm going. So I had to anticipate every one of his moves. And it took about an hour and a half to sit down and write. He's probably going to stand up, he's probably going to run out, he's probably going to say, is that all? And then I actually wrote out my responses. No, please sit down, because of what I had planned next, which was all the subsequent aftercare that was going to happen after this difficult meeting. And it wasn't just going to offer him the EAP. Do you guys have EAPs? You know, it was, okay, I know his social world because I know him fairly well. I've worked with him for nearly 10 years. I know his friends who are outside of this circle. So I'd already given them a call saying, I'm about to have this difficult meeting on a Thursday. Will you call him on Friday and will you call him on Saturday? And also I had a series of appointments set up after letting him go to check in with him myself personally, and I forced myself to do it because it was in the diary, and when it beeped, I did it. And then we set up a whole range of skill increasing sessions to put together a resume and help him with job applications. So that is a way that you can lead with kindness. That hour and a half saved me the next 4 nights of being sleepless. That's what I needed to do with myself. So that's the way we all talk about leading with kindness, but that's radical kindness, is to work out how you're going to care for this person, because we care for our people, but we're always in situations. Remember, there's a list that you will have at the end of your career of people you probably should say sorry to. I have a list of people, 7 of whom blocked me, because of how badly I handled the conversations and how little they knew about their performance and how lacking it was in the early days. It was love, 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 see ya, here's your package, out the door. And by the way, they were the ones most likely to take out Fair Work claims as well. And then once you've had a go at knocking it into shape, hour and a half is probably, it'll save you anxiety if you run like me, then knuckle down and get it done. Knuckle down and get it done. All right. Now, I'm just going to hand you back to your tables for another important discussion. Think about, has anyone got someone they've got to performance manage who's not in this room in the next few minutes? Right? No hands. Or think about a difficult conversation you've got to have at work. If you can't really come up with one at work, maybe at home. So here's your table discussion there. What's done well at your workplace when it comes to this, when you think about mapping the territory? And what could be improved? How could you improve? All right, 10 minutes, and then random table number generator will come into play. Random table generator came up with 5. Number 5, table number 5. All right, here we go. All right. There's a microphone. Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Testing. We discussed performance management, as is on the screen. And what did we say? Yeah, everyone has a different experience at their own environment, at job. And some of ours were positive, some not as positive. Definitely some things that can be improved on. Some good things were some of us have really frequent check-ins. Not always super formal, but informal, which make it a bit more conversational and allow people to speak their mind, which is really good. Other people have really long distances between their check-ins, and they only have kind of maybe every 6 months. And we were kind of saying it's better if you know what is going to happen in the meeting. It shouldn't ever come as a surprise to you. Shout out Andrew, good point. So yeah, what else was there? Anyone else?
Yeah,
Yes,
but don't leave it too long. Don't say,
Yes.
can you meet me in 7 days' time?
And also training for young managers to make sure they're not thrown into the deep end, because sometimes people have the right intentions, but if they're not trained correctly, it's just hard for them, and then that snowballs onto the people below them, and then they get scarred from bad experiences, and it just leads to bad things in the future.
Fantastic, great. Next table is number 8.
Thank you. Okay, so
Name?
Carolyn from Meta. Hi, how are you? I love that this table got up every time. We should call on them and ask them if they had any good pearls of wisdom. So around performance management, mapping the territory, it's funny, things that the business does well are also things that could be improved, because I think there's two sides to every coin. So when you think about things that are done well, it's around making sure that you have regular checkpoints, that there's agendas set for every meeting, and that people know that when they come into a conversation that they're going to go through their goals, and it's always going to be a conversation about how they're doing, as opposed to having the conversations be really free form and with no real agenda or outcome. That generally happens. What can be improved? A lot of things, every time I ask the table about feedback around certain things or how they do certain management or conversations, it's always about, well, it depends on the person and it depends on the type of relationship I have with that person. So I think it's more about, well, we decided it was more about also the company making sure that things are more, for lack of a better term, enforced when it comes to checkpoints and feedback, and making sure that as a manager you are keeping on top of how your team is doing, and you also are reporting that back to your business so that there is accountability across both sides, and that the conversation is always two-way rather than having it be kind of a command and control type of format. So making sure that you're always, when you're giving feedback, you're always getting it as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I know every business now has a HR system, and half of the work of a leader is to learn to navigate the technology so you can actually give regular feedback, because you're like, it's a different system, I've got to log in, what's my password? But that's really important as a way. These are the steps they've built in. Hey guys, I'm done. A commitment to leading is a commitment to learning. Right, so here's a few resources. I mentioned them there. They're great books or podcasts or anything you can get into, but there's so many out there that are really important. Look, leadership is costly, but it is ultimately the only way to create positive and lasting change. Right? So I bow to you, because it is a task. I have to have a difficult conversation with my 20-year-old. We're empty nesters, and the 20-year-old moved out 6 months ago, and she's a bit too much like me. And I branded myself as the fun parent, which is very short-sighted once they leave home. So I say, you want to have fun? She's like, yeah, but not with you. All right? So it's an ongoing discipline that will have benefits in your personal lives as well. So keep up the good work, because, now this is not optional stuff. Because, we have now bystander legislation that's just dropping in New South Wales. So if you're sitting around in a meeting and you feel, particularly as it relates to males interacting with females, if there is a raised voice or aggression, you can now be held liable if you don't speak up during the meeting. So in terms of mapping the territory, the pre-work before meetings or anticipating those things, you need to be red hot on that. So you can work in a way that is caring. To be kind is to be clear and to be firm. So wish you all the best. Thank you.